Chris Sewall here, baseball card collector, investor, dealer, in that order. Welcome, everyone. A week ago, I put out a video about the junk wax era and sort of how it compares to things today. And you all left a lot of great comments on that video. And yeah, you always leave a lot of great comments. But in this particular video, it was just like, comment after comment. I was like, oh, that's an interesting thought, or that's a perspective I hadn't really considered, or, there were some that I just thought were pretty funny. So I picked a few of them to go over in this video here. It covers sort of a variety of topics. I'll give my 2 cents sort of on each topic. But yeah, thank you everyone for leaving a comment, whether I used it here in the video or not. We'll start with a quick funny one, as I talked a lot about parallels in the modern day sports cards. We were living in a parallel universe. That one made me chuckle a bit. One thing a lot of people mentioned, which I didn't touch on in the video, is that there were specific events around which led to some of the peaks and valleys we see in sports card interest over the years. Here's one example. The strike in '94 in baseball turned me off to the hobby as a dealer. And yeah, that's totally true. I remember that strike being just a big turnoff to a lot of people to baseball, but also baseball cards and subsequently sports cards in general. And I'm sure that contributed to the decline in interest in sports cards throughout the 1990s. Other events people mentioned included the baseball steroid scandal, 9/11, the 2008 stock market crash, the U.S. making gambling a lot more legal and accessible, COVID, which I did touch on, but there were others, but those were some of the more notable ones. One thing I mentioned about the chart was that it was non-scientific. It's not based on any data. It's just purely my sort of best guess as to what interest in the hobby would look like over time. And obviously, the farther you go back, the harder it is to guess because, again, just no real data, and it's a long time ago at this point. But somebody actually did send me some good data about some of those junk wax era years. Carl sent me an email saying that there was information about how many times a newspaper article around the country wrote an article about baseball card investing year to year from 1982 to 1996. And I graphed it out, and this is basically what it looked like. And this is probably a pretty good representation of overall interest in the hobby year to year. And it basically mirrors what I guessed, huge spike in interest in sports cards in the late 1980s. It peaked somewhere around the early 90s, and then sort of a steady decline throughout the 1990s. I had guessed the peak is about 1992. This sort of suggests it's more like 1990, so maybe it peaked a little bit earlier than I had thought. And I'd also sort of guessed that the junk wax era, boom spike or whatever, started a little later. I'd guessed 1988. This sort of suggests it started earlier, maybe more like 1985 or so. All right, and one more comment about my graph. I was one I actually read incorrectly when I first read it. Your graph looks like what it would look like if I attempted to draw Batman's cowl. I actually read it as Batman's crawl. And if you look at the graph and imagine Batman crawling, once you see it, you can't unsee it. And this version of Batman would be one that Sir Mix-a-Lot would appreciate. And if you get that reference, you get a gold star. But the main question about the last video was, are we in junk wax era 2.0 today? Like, are the things we saw about the junk wax era back then sort of repeating themselves now? And a lot of people left really, really great comments about this, some interesting takes on both sides. A lot of people said, yes, absolutely, this is junk wax era 2.0. A lot of interesting reasons given. Some include things like you can now buy cards at Best Buy and Dick's Sporting Goods store and things like that. And this was an absolute staple of the junk wax era. You could buy cards at hardware stores or gas stations or 7-Elevens, basically anywhere you went. Other things include overproduction. That was obviously cited quite a bit. But also things like, base cards. People have no interest in base cards these days. They have essentially no value. That was also something we saw during the junk wax era. A lot of people also said, no, this is not junk wax era 2.0, completely different eras. Way too many differences for you to compare them in that way. Lots of good reasons given here as well. But the main one being that the hobby is just completely different, and you just have so many more options today, which is something I touched on in the video. A lot more brands to choose from, and just a lot more things you can get out of packs, whether that be autographs and parallels and inserts and refractors and all this stuff. A lot of these things didn't really exist back then. Just gauging from the comments and sort of like if we were to boil it down to a simple yes-no question, like are we in junk wax era 2.0, yes or no? I would say 2/3 of people would say yes, and 1/3 would say no for what that's worth. Like I mentioned in the first video, I actually would say no personally. And yeah, I want to expand on that a little bit. Like when I think about what junk wax era means, when we were in it back then, we didn't refer to it as that. Back then, we didn't even realize it. It wasn't until many, many years later that term got coined. I don't know how, but I think that it got coined because like when you look back at those years, there's just nothing of value. Like there's no card in a 1989 Topps pack that you can pull that has any value. Like, there's not a card worth more than 25 cents. The major stars, Nolan Ryan or Bojack, they're 25 cents tops. Even a Hall of Fame rookies from those years, Craig Biggio or John Smoltz, you know, these are like 25-cent cards. That's the best thing you can pull out of an 89 tops pack. And that's essentially the case for almost all sets from about 86 to maybe 92, with a couple exceptions. And to me, that's what I think of when I think of junk wax era. Like, there's just nothing of value. And that's because everything was overprinted. Now, that's not the case today. And trust me, I'm not saying things are all like awesome today. I mean, packs are wildly overpriced. The value proposition of opening packs today is absolutely terrible. I think it might be the worst that it's ever been. And then, of course, there's overproduction and all these, you know, crazy parallels and all that. But you can pull, you know, valuable cards out of packs today. And I also believe a lot of these cards will hold value down the road if you pull the right player and, you know, the right rookie auto or whatever. So I think 10 years from now, we're not going to look back at these years and say, oh, there's absolutely nothing of value in those years. I just don't think that's I don't think that's going to happen. So for me personally, and yeah, this is really just a personal semantics thing, I guess. For me personally, junk wax era isn't the right term for the state that we're currently in. Here's a comment I really liked. 100% this is the new and improved junk wax era. I don't know why when I read that just felt on point. Like the new and improved junk wax era. Like there's elements from the junk wax era, but it's very different, and it's, yeah, new and improved. I don't know, that just felt like felt appropriate. But I think if you were like giving, or if I was giving a name to the current era and I wanted to use the term wax, I'd probably go with something more like the overpriced wax era, as again, there's the value proposition of wax today is just so poor. But a lot of you left the comment, and I've seen this comment many times before in previous videos, that we're more in a junk slab era. And for me personally, if I were to sort of name the current era we're in and give it a negative connotation, it would be this, the junk slab era. As I think a very key component to the last few years is how obsessed the hobby has become with grading. And you can see the parallels where, you know, back in the 80s, the hobby got so obsessed with wax, they made so much wax to the point where it had very, very little value, or most of it had very, very little value. And today, the hobby's become so obsessed with grading, people are grading so many cards that the masses of graded cards today have also, you know, suddenly found that they have very, very little value. For me, who's been a full-time dealer for 15-ish years now, but been in the hobby, you know, much longer than that, this is one of the most drastic changes that I've seen in the last few years that kind of blows my mind. I can't tell you how many collections I buy where somebody's sending me, you know, hundreds of graded cards, and it's all ultra modern stuff, and you know, I'm going through the cards and they're worth like $1, $2, $3, $4, $5 type of thing. And remember, somebody spent $20 a piece to have each of these graded, and this is something I've touched on before on the channel, but it's just amazing how much of this is out there. Again, considering the fact that it costs $20 to have each of these cards graded. I'm looking at all these cards and I'm like, okay, I'm going to put these out at a card show in a $5 box, and you know, chances are most of them won't sell for that. And I think in the same way that, you know, years after the junk wax era, we look back at those years and we're like, what were we doing? Like, why were we overproducing, you know, base cards to such a ridiculous level? I think maybe 10 years from now, we're going to look back at these years and say the same thing about grading. Like, what were we doing? Why were we grading all these base cards and common inserts and just grading way more cards than it makes any sense to do? All right, the next comment is actually more of like a question from me to you, the viewers, and it involves the term flipping, as this has sort of become a terminology video in some ways. But I always considered flipping to be somebody who buys a card and then a short time later sells the card for, you know, for more, or the goal is to sell it for a short time later more. But I hear the term flipping used all the time. Like, for example, I'm a dealer. I buy collections, I strategically break them up, and then I sell them. You know, I piece them out over time. I don't consider that to be flipping, but maybe that is flipping. I mean, I'm buying them with the intention to resell them. So do you, the audience, consider that to be flipping, or do you see flipping as something else? Or like if somebody buys a whole bunch of a player, you know, a whole bunch of cards of one player, stockpiles them, puts them away for a year with the intention to resell them a year from now, expecting the player to have a good year and go up in value or something like that. Do you consider that flipping? I've never considered something like that flipping. I've always thought of that as like investing, or, you know, short-term investing or whatever. But I think, you know, maybe my understanding of the word flipping is not really up to date, because you hear flipping used all the time. It's sort of become a little bit of a generic term, and I'm just wondering what you, the audience, or, you know, the general community feels the term flipping actually means, because I feel like maybe, you know, maybe I'm a little out of touch with it. And the last comment, or let's say category comments I wanted to touch on is not something from just this past video, but I've seen these comments in many of my previous videos, and that is something along the lines of, there's just not enough true collectors in the hobby anymore. It's all about the money and turning a quick buck. And I was thinking about making an entire standalone video on this, because like I said, I see this comment all the time, but I thought I'd at least touch on it here. So I completely understand the sentiment and totally understand why it might feel that way. But as someone who sells, you know, hundreds or thousands of cards every day to mainly collectors, I can promise you there are tons of true collectors or pure collectors, whatever term you want to use, still in the hobby today. And in fact, I would say that there's more today than there has been in recent years. If you look at any social media outlet, YouTube, Instagram, Reddit, Facebook, whatever, yeah, you'll see a whole bunch of posts about I flipped this for this, and this card's worth this much money, and how much did I make off that, sale, and I hit this big card in a break, and yeah, it is a lot about the money and not so much about collecting or love of cards. But I think that's just because that's the loudest piece of the hobby, and it makes sense, right? Those are the kind of posts that get a lot of views. Those are the kind of posts that appeal to the masses in the short term, and so that stuff gets pushed front and center, and it can feel like that's what the hobby is, but it isn't. Like, this is a very general statement, but I think a lot of collectors are probably more introverted. When I was a collector in the 90s, social media didn't exist in the 90s, but if it did, I would not have posted anything about my collection. I would have just had no interest. I just wanted to collect cards quietly in my room, and that's what made me happy. And a lot of collectors are like this, and so they're sort of in the background as the true heartbeat of the hobby while this loud noise gets pushed front and center. Another example of this is card shows. If you go to card shows and just sort of generally look around, you'll see a lot of like people running around with Zion cases trying to like flip cards and make a quick buck. But if you look deeper, you'll see at the dollar, there's a card dealer with dollar boxes, and there'll be a dozen people just sitting around there quietly doing their thing. And so I think what can be seen on the surface is not representative of the hobby as a whole. I'll give two examples, and like I said, I'll probably make an entire video on this topic, but take a look at the two cards here. On the left, 1985 Topps Mark McGwire PSA 8 rookie, and that card is worth about $30 or so in that grade. And I mean, it's not like an investment card. It's not really a high grade card for the 80s, and it's very, very common card. They're all over the place. It's not really at a $30 card. You can't really make money, say, buying it on eBay and flipping it for more. I mean, fees are going to kill any sort of lucky profit you get there. What it is a really just cool card. It's a very important card from the mid 1980s of a very critical player, and it was the hottest card in the entire hobby in 1998 when he was chasing the home run record. So there's a lot of cool memories around that card. It's the first time Topps put USA players on the card. It's a pre-rookie of McGwire. This is a very, very cool card. And who would be buying that card? It's collectors, people who want that card for their collection. There's not really many other reasons to buy that card. I mean, there are going to be exceptions, but for the most part, anyone buying a PSA 8 1985 Topps Mark McGwire is a collector who wants it for their collection. Same thing with the card on the right. It's 2024 Topps Chrome Refractor Nolan Arenado. It's worth maybe $1 or $2. There's no like investment opportunity in that card or flippable opportunities in that card buying it on eBay. You're not going to grade it because the PSA 10's not, probably wouldn't even cover the cost of grading. So there's no like grading opportunity there. It's who would be buying that card? It's just a Nolan Arenado collector or a rainbow collector or somebody or a refractor collector. It's a collector. These two cards would basically almost always only be purchased by collectors. Again, there might be exceptions, but for the most part, anyone buying these two cards are going to be true collectors. If you plug in 1985 Topps Mark McGwire PSA 8 into eBay and look at completed sales, there's hundreds of completed sales of this card in this grade just in the past few months, ranging from sort of low 20s up to maybe the mid 40s or so. And I am sure that the vast majority of these buyers are true collectors. Again, there's not really another reason to buy this card unless you want it for your collection. There'll be exceptions again, but for the most part, every single one of these buyers is a true collector who just wants to have this cool card in their collection for some reason. If we look at the Nolan Arenado, same thing. If we plug in 2024 Topps Chrome Refractor Nolan Arenado into eBay, you'll see a long list of completed sales, variety of colors and parallels, and $1, $2, $3, $4, $5. Again, there's no investment opportunity in any of these cards. There's no like flipping opportunity. It's not worth grading them for profit. So, basically the majority of these buyers are going to be true collectors who they're Nolan Arenado fans. They like this card for some reason. Maybe they're refractor collectors. I don't know, but my point is that we see a lot of I bought this for $700 and flipped it for $900, and that is the sort of front and center exciting piece of the hobby that we see a lot. But the heartbeat of the hobby is something else, and I think there's a lot more true collectors out there than it appears. But that's it for now. Thank you everyone for watching. Again, really appreciate it, everyone who left a comment, and would love to hear people's comments on my thoughts and opinions in this video as well. And for anyone wondering, yes, I did indeed get a haircut halfway through the video. Very, very perceptive of you. But appreciate it. See you all again next time. And remember to eat your vegetables. Thanks, everyone.